Anyone who has played even a small amount of chess, especially online, is familiar with the concept of an opening trap. We've all fallen for one at some point or another. In many cases, a failed opening trap will leave you with a terrible position, but not always. We've compiled 10 opening traps that are not only guaranteed to work, but if your opponent doesn't fall for them exactly, you'll still have a decent position. Number 1. Noah's Ark. This trap occurs in the Ruy Lopez opening, and the goal is to trap the opponent's light-squared bishop. After some theory, the position can arrive here after black plays knight takes d4. After an exchange of knights, white's queen is aiming to win back a sacrificed pawn. This is the beginning of the trap. If you are fortunate enough for your opponent to play queen takes d4, the following sequence is available. c5, queen d5, bishop e6, stopping the checkmate threat and allowing the rook to be protected. Queen c6 check, bishop d7, queen d5, c4. Now the bishop is finally trapped. But wait, what if white does not fall for the trap and take the poisoned pawn? White has other good options such as bishop d5, c3, a4, but all lead to a roughly equal position, which is great for black out of the opening. Number 2. Almate. This opening trap, if your opponent cooperates, can lead to one of the most beautiful and famous checkmates in chess. Named after Sire de Legal, it dates back all the way to the 18th century. It occurs in an Italian game, and in this position we play knight c3. Black might play bishop g4, pinning the knight to white's queen, and we can play h3, forcing black to make a decision about the light-squared bishop. If they retreat with bishop h5, this allows the brilliant knight takes e5, where a free queen is offered. If black takes the bait and grabs the queen, can you spot the famous mate in 2? That's right. Bishop takes f7, king e7, which is forced, knight d5 mate. So, if our opponent does not take the queen bait, is this a dubious position? Not at all. Black's best response is knight takes e5, allowing white to win the light-squared bishop with queen takes h5, and after black takes the bishop on c4, white can win the piece right back with a queen check on b5, picking up the knight on the following turn no matter what black's response is. White is up a pawn with control of the center, a great place to be out of the opening. Number 3. The Cambridge Springs Trap. This trap arises out of a popular line in the Queen's Gambit Declined. In this position, white might take the pawn with c takes d5, black responds with e takes d5, and white might be tempted to take the pawn on d5 with the knight, taking advantage of the fact that the knight defending it on f6 is pinned to the queen. Well, black can disregard this pin and take on d5 anyway. Can you spot black's best continuation after white takes the queen on d8? It's the only check in the position, bishop b4 check. The idea becomes painfully clear to white here. The only legal move is to block with the queen. After bishop takes d2, king takes d2, black can scoop up the bishop on d8 and is simply up a piece. If your opponent doesn't take the poisoned pawn with knight takes d5 and plays e3 instead, providing a valuable escape square for the king, black can play the straightforward c6, leading to a roughly equal position. Number 4. The Lasker Trap. The Lasker Trap is named after the second world champion Emanuel Lasker, and it happens in the Alban counter gambit against white's Queen's Gambit, shown here. After d takes e5, d4, white can't develop the knight to c3, and they might play the seemingly innocuous e3, which is in fact a serious mistake. After bishop b4 check, white's best response is to block with their bishop on d2, which is where the trap begins. Black can leave their bishop hanging on b4 and take the pawn on e3. If white takes this free bishop, black has to follow up e takes f2 check, and since at this point the king is needed to defend the queen on d1, it must maintain contact with king e2. Can you spot black's only winning move here? That's right, it's a rare under promotion. F takes g1 equals knight check. This is the only way to take the knight on g1 with tempo coming in the form of a check on the king. If the pawn is promoted to a queen, white can trade queens on d8 with tempo as well, pick up the promoted queen on g1, and be left with an even material game with black having no attack. Another convenient aspect of this under-promotion is that white can't even take the knight. If they do, black has bishop g4 check, skewering the king and queen. If we go all the way back to d takes e3 and white does not take the bishop on g4, but plays f takes e3 instead, black enjoys a great position after queen h4 check, g3, queen e4, attacking the rook on h1 and the pawn on e3 since white's bishop can't defend it on account of the pin. Number 5. The Rubenstein Trap. This one is named after Polish grandmaster Akiba Rubenstein, who is considered to have been one of the greatest players to never have become world chess champion. That said, it's interesting to note that this trap is named after him because he fell into it twice. It can happen in the Queen's Gambit declined, though it requires a lot of cooperation from your opponent. White has just played their 11th move, but still, this exact position has occurred hundreds of times in master-level play, including this game between Alekhine and Rubenstein. Here, Rubenstein went for knight e4, and Alekhine followed up with bishop f4. Black then played f5, trying to solidify the knight on e4. At this point, white has the tricky knight takes d5. If black is greedy and takes it with c takes d5, can you spot white's winning move in this position? Yes, bishop c7, and the black queen is trapped. In Rubenstein's game, he saw this and did not play c takes d5, but rather the best try for black with bishop d6. A free center pawn was enough for Alekhine to gain and maintain an advantage, winning the game in the end. Number 6. The Siberian Trap. This trap can happen in the Smith-Morra Gambit and other openings, more often in blitz and across all playing levels. After white has sacrificed a pawn for initiative, both sides develop normally to get to this position. Here, black has the great move knight g4, starting to add pressure to the h2 square. White might get an inflated sense of safety since the knight on f3 protects against mate, so they play h3, attempting to kick the knight on g4. This falls right into the trap. Can you see why? If you spotted knight d4, well done. Black is happy to leave the g4 knight hanging as it has an attack on the queen. And if white takes the knight with knight takes d4, black is now free to checkmate on h2 with the queen. In fact, white's best response is to take the knight on g4, getting 2 pieces for the queen, but still resulting in a lost position. If white doesn't play the crucial h3 mistake, playing instead for instance knight b5 to attack the queen and defend d4 with another piece, black can move the queen back to b8 and enjoy a pleasant position while up a pawn. Number 7. The Fajarowicz Trap. This sneaky trap comes out of the Budapest Gambit opening. Black ends up sacrificing 2 minor pieces in order to win the white queen. Here, white will very likely play d takes e4, and after knight e4, knight f3, d6, e takes d6, bishop takes d6, white might play g3, a reasonable looking move preparing to fianchetto the bishop. This is in fact a grave error. Can you see why? That's right, black has the resource knight takes f2. The idea behind this is if white recaptures on f2, black has the discovered attack bishop g3 check on the next turn, allowing the black queen to capture the white queen on d1. If white doesn't make the mistake of g3, instead playing the engine's best move knight bd2, black can respond with bishop f5, giving a roughly equal position where black has sacrificed a pawn for a lead in development. Number 8. The Blackburn Shilling Trap. In this trap, black violates all the basic opening principles in order to catch white off guard. At first, it looks like black is playing careless moves, but after queen takes g2, you can see who is really in trouble. This trap comes out of a variation of the Italian game, or Gioco Piano. After the slightly dubious knight d4 from black, white can get greedy and take the pawn on e5, leading to this position. Black can now play queen g5, and if white's greed continues, they will play knight takes f7, forking black's queen and rook. As mentioned earlier, queen takes g2 is the continuation, and white's rook is now under attack, so they will quite likely be tempted to play rook f1. Black then plays queen takes e4, and white only has 2 legal moves, to block with the queen or bishop. If the queen blocks, then black can take the queen with the knight for a significant material advantage. And if the bishop blocks, black has an even quicker path to victory. Can you see what it is? A very quick path to victory indeed with the beautiful knight f3 checkmate. Going back to black's queen g5 move, even if white doesn't play the critical mistake of knight takes f7, but rather checks the king with bishop takes f7 check, black is still in good shape after sidestepping with king d8. In this case, white has to castle to avoid the threat of queen takes g2, and black can pick up the free knight on e5, giving up 2 pawns and castling rights in exchange for a full piece. Number 9. Smothered Mate in the Budapest Gambit. Here's another trap that stems from the Budapest Gambit. After the gambit is played, mainline theory can arrive at this position. Black can disregard the hanging bishop and play knight g takes e5. If white gets greedy and takes the bishop on b4 right away, can you spot black's immediate win? That's right, black has smothered mate with knight d3 checkmate. If they trade on e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, then take the bishop, black still has smothered mate. If white happens to see the smothered mate threat, they can play the solid e3 instead of a takes b4, and black can trade off the dark squared bishop with bishop takes d2. Here, the engine says the position is roughly equal. Number 10. The fishing pole trap. The concept of the fishing pole can come out of many variations of the Ruy-Lopez opening. Some fishing poles work, and some don't. After this common line of the Ruy-Lopez, the trap begins with the simple bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3. White will likely respond with h3 with the intention of kicking the bishop, and the engine agrees with this move. Black, of course, doesn't want to move the same piece twice in succession, which is where the ingenious h5 comes in, leaving the bishop hanging. If white can't resist the free bishop, they'll play h takes g4, taking the bait of the fishing pole. Black's response of h takes g4 right back has a twofold purpose. It attacks the knight on f3 and opens up the h-file for an attack. If white tries to save the knight with knight takes e5, can you see black's forced mating sequence? That's right, it starts with queen h4. The threat down the h-file is now obvious, and white attempts to give an escape square to the king with f3 or f4. This idea is shut right down with g3, with no way to stop mate on h2 or h1. If white realizes they can't move the knight on f3, they might play something like d3, but black is still decidedly better, with no rush to take the knight as it can't move from that square anyway.